So, Jed, as I was starting to say, it's a delight and a pleasure to be with you 2 days in a row, and I enjoyed our men's panel yesterday, and I'm very much looking forward to this session, which will be more interactive and experiential. And I'm delighted to introduce you all to Jed Diamond, who is a long-term therapist who works with individuals, couples, as well as families. Jed is the author of 17 books, including international bestsellers, The Irritable Male Syndrome, Surviving Male Menopause, and The Enlightened Marriage, the 5 transformative stages of relationships and why the best is still to come. And he's also his best-selling book, My Distant Dad, Healing the Family Father Wound, which is really the basis of this session, that I see as a huge problem in our society today, whereby children of all genders, boys, girls, non-binaries, grow up with fathers that are distant or not available emotionally or physically, and are just angry, all of which creates a big wound in the person's soul. And this is an issue I've had to deal with in my own life. So I'm convinced this is an important issue, and I'm happy that you all are here to hopefully benefit. So thank you all, and let's turn it over to Jed.
Well, thank you, Yossi. I want to thank you all who are here. Thank you for making this choice to be here with me today. Like Yossi, this has been a big issue in my life that goes back a long ways. And I would venture to say personally, and part of this little breakout session, not only hopefully we'll have some more interaction, but also be able to speak more personally about how these issues affected our own lives, are affecting them, and hopefully some of the healing that we can engage. So for me, I would say that the father wound has not only affected my relationship with myself in significant ways, but has affected my relationship in every love relationship that I've had, has affected my relationship with my children. And I would suggest too, from being a therapist and working with thousands of people, is that this may be the one or maybe the most important issue of relationship connection or disconnection that often goes unrecognized. The beginning for me, and I'd like to just share a little bit personally about my own story, how I got involved with this work and with men's work, really began for me on November 21st, 1969, when I held my son in my arms for the first time, shortly after he was born. And I made a promise to him that I would be a different kind of father than my father was able to be for me, and to do everything I could to create a world where we were fully healed in our relationship with ourselves, which I think is critical, our relationships in our love lives, our relationships with our families. And my father wound began many years before. At age 5, my uncle was driving me to the mental hospital. And I asked him, why do we have to go? And he said, your father needs you. And I wanted to know, what's the matter with him? It's a 5-year-old. I didn't know why we were going. There was silence. In our family, you didn't talk about what I came to understand as the trauma that impacts so many people, where we have fathers and other relationships that are disconnected and lost. And I visited my father for every Sunday. We took the drive from our home in Los Angeles with my uncle to Camarillo State Mental Hospital. And I began to understand through some of the stories he would tell me when I could try to get him to talk about what was happening to why was he there? And what I got was that he'd had a, quote, nervous breakdown. And the breakdown was related to the fact that he couldn't make a living doing what he loved to do. He was a writer, he was an actor in New York, and he couldn't support his family. Well, I was the family. I'm an only child. And what I came to believe is that there must have been something wrong with me that caused my father to have a breakdown, because whatever it is supporting your family was, I created a pressure on him that caused him to take an overdose of sleeping pills. And he didn't die, but our lives were never the same. And I grew up with two questions. I wondered what happened to my father and when it would happen to me. But very quickly, I listened to my mother, who basically ignored the loss. I remember singing a little tune as my father faded more into the background, because after a year visiting him, one day I came with my uncle and my father said, who's the kid with you, Harry? And I was destroyed. My father didn't even know who I was. So I stopped going. And I spent a lot of those early years forgetting, because I didn't want to have a father that was crazy. I didn't want to have a father that was mentally ill. I didn't want to have a father that took an overdose of sleeping pills. And so I blocked all of that out. I grew up, I was very successful, I was very independent, I learned to take care of myself, and the father wound that I had got buried. I want to talk some about how that impacts us. I wrote a book, as Yossi said, I wrote 17 books, really in some way to make sense of my own life. If you read any of my books, you'll see they're often very personal, and it is part of my healing to do that. And in the book, My Distant Dad, Healing the Family Father Wound, I introduced it with a quote from a psychologist who I had read, who I felt was knowledgeable. His name is James Hollis. And he captured for me the experience that I was coming to have. And this is what he said: a father may be physically present, but absent in spirit. His absence may be literal through death, divorce, or dysfunction, but more often it is a symbolic absence through silence and the inability to transmit that what he also may not have acquired. And I think so many of us, I've come to see, have had fathers that couldn't transmit what they themselves had not learned from their fathers. And these wounds, I've found, are intergenerational, and they pass throughout time, but are in some ways so common that we've come to see them as part of the landscape of being man, and in that way somewhat invisible. And part of, I think, the healing journey that I've been on is to make the invisible visible, to come to see the truth about the father wound. The last chapter of my book, I realized there was a father wound that I didn't even know existed, and I didn't know that I had. And what I did know was that the wound that I had with an absent father affected how I felt about myself as a man, who I was as a man, what I felt was missing in me as a man. It affected myself as a father when my first son was born. My wife and I have 5 children now, 17 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. And this loss has impacted all my family. It also, I came to see, has impacted every woman that I have loved. My first wife, I realized, had a father wound and impacted not only her life, but our relationship. I got divorced and remarried, and my second wife, I realized, also she had a father wound that affected her and our relationship and contributed to our marriage falling apart. Still feel the pain of that. I married for the 3rd time to Carlin. Some of you know Carlin. And we've been together now for 43 years. And she also has a father wound, but we've been able to talk about it, to explore it together. And the father wound that I didn't realize I had came from my mother, who I knew her father died when she was 5 years old. Same year I lost my father. But she never talked about it. It was like it didn't exist. It was like just part of life. And yet she had 5 marriages that didn't work. 5, including my father. So I've come to see that the father wound impacts a lot of us. And I'm guessing a lot of you that are here today. And as we're talking, I know for me, one of the lessons, if there's one kind of underlying thing I would pass on to you, is this, that the father wound and so many other wounds that many of us have had, not just the father wound, many of us have had other trauma, but this is one that I think is very big, as Yossi says. It impacts a lot of people, and it's relatively hidden, is that woundedness causes us to feel that there's something wrong with us. Many of us go to therapists, many of us go to recovery programs, and we don't recognize the wound. And we often end up with labels that tell us some degree of what's wrong with us. They're called diagnoses. You know, I've been diagnosed with a number of different things, from manic depressive illness to attention deficit disorder to addictions of one kind or another, which I've had, and they're all real and they all needed to be addressed. But what I would offer to all of us is the notion that rather than looking for what's wrong with us, as so many of us have been doing, and so many of us have been in the way of healers that have also looked for what is wrong with us, a better question, I think, and a more healing opportunity is to look for what happened to us. Where were the wounds? The healing journey for me began with my son being born and wanting to be a better and a different kind of father. But it led me to seeing my father and my mother in a new way, to seeing them as wounded themselves. And I began to see that wound travels back through time. And there's actually been some very interesting new research that shows that intergenerational trauma is also very common, that the wounds that happen to our fathers and our fathers' fathers and our mothers and our mothers' mothers travel back through the generations. And we know now there's a lot of, again, fairly new work on trauma healing and opportunities for various ways of healing trauma. But the first step in that is to let go, I think, of labeling ourselves. My wife, Carlin, wrote a book called Love It, Don't Label It, a practical guide for using spiritual principles in everyday life. And I think all of us could do with less labeling and having labels put on us, not to negate the fact that it can be valuable to name what we have, whatever name fits for you. But the labels that often are put on us by others, the labels we put on ourselves that tell us we're less than, that we're never going to have a good relationship, that when we have a relationship, often it doesn't work and we wonder who's to blame. Was it her? Was it him? Was it my partner? And often no one is to blame. That doesn't mean no one's responsible. We all have responsibility for our own healing. So what I'd like you to consider, and in a little bit, we're going to have us break into some little smaller groups where you'll have a chance to talk to each other. But I'd like you to start to reflect on two questions. First question is, in what way do you feel the father wound has impacted your life? Question number one. What way has the father wound impacted your life? And the second question is, how has it impacted your relationships? Because I think in many ways, this whole gathering, this whole summit has to do with relationships, has to do with connections, broken connections, and reconnections that have been healing. And I'd like to leave you before we go into our breakout, which I'll ask Yossi and the team to help facilitate getting you into some smaller groups. But I want to give you a couple of things to think about beyond the father wound. It sets a bigger context. And the bigger context for me is the healing that can occur in relationships. And one of the places that has been particularly healing for me is my men's group. Now, my men's group has been meeting for a long time. And my wife, Carlin, who I mentioned, we've been in a really healing and beautifully growing marriage for 43 years now. And Carlin will tell you that one of the reasons we've had a really great 43-year marriage is that I've been in a men's group that's been meeting regularly for 44 years. 44 years, the same guys have been meeting. 3 of our guys have died, passed on to the next world. The others of us are still alive, and we continue to meet regularly. And these guys have been the healers for me to help me deal with a lot of the wounds that I've had. And I want to leave you with a poem before we break into a group that some of you know Michael Mead, who was with you earlier. Michael, years ago, was part of a workshop with a woman named Clarissa Pinkola Estes, woman who wrote the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. And during the workshop, Michael gave poetry and storytelling, you know, some about Michael's background. And Clarissa offered this poem. Nobody knew, I didn't know that she wrote poetry. Thought she was, wrote wonderful novels. And she offered this poetry called Father Earth. When she said that, just the hair on the back of my head stood up. The Father Earth. What does that mean? Well, here's what she said of Father Earth. She said, there's a 2-million-year-old man no one knows. They cut into his rivers. They peeled wide pieces of hide from his legs. They left scorch marks on his buttocks. He did not cry out. No matter what they did to him, he did not cry out. He held firm. And now he raises his stabbed hands and whispers that we can heal him yet. We begin the roles of gauze, the gut, the sutures, the grafts, and carefully we turn his body over, and underneath him, his lifelong lover, the old woman, is perfect and unmarked. He has laid upon his 2 million-year-old lover all this time, protecting her with his old back, with his old scarred back. And the soil beneath her is fertile and black with her tears. Father Earth, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. For me, that still resonates so deeply with the coming together of all the different energies and polarities. And what would it be like to see Earth in a different way, to see all our relationships in some new ways? So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Yossi and the tech people to see if we can have you break into some small groups. And again, what I want to offer, and as always, let whatever is alive for you to be true for you. You don't have to follow instructions, but if it's alive for you to share a bit about in what way the father wound may have impacted your life and how it's impacted your relationships, please take some time to talk with each other and share. And could you say we're going to have about 15 minutes? Am I right, Yossi?
Yeah, whatever you'd like it to be. Yeah, but
Let's take about 15 minutes.
Yeah, so they can divide it among themselves. So there's 32 of us here, and minus you and me, there's about 30 groups of 3. There'll be 10 groups. You'll be in a group of 3. Hopefully all 3 of you are there. So take perhaps 3 minutes each, and then that will take 10 minutes, and then have a discussion among all of you, but just kind of hold space first to get everyone's voice into the space, and from there you can have a discussion, and then when they come back here, we'll have a larger group share. Is that
exactly? Share and questions, just sharing our collective experiences, because healing occurs in a group context, in a connected context. It's like the wounds occur in a context. So yes, we'll come back and share a bit collectively.
Thank you. So Michael, it's over to you here, and I see there's some movement still with some people dropping and people joining. Someone just
I have one more person coming on. If you could be just a moment, let me reassign them to a room. We've had just a couple of people shift quickly, and I'd just like to make sure the rooms are as full as they possibly can be, and balanced as much as they can be. I think we're fine. If you're ready to go, we're set for 14 minutes, and then everybody will see a countdown for a minute to return. So we'll go ahead and open the rooms.
Yeah, well, that reminds us the recording was paused and is coming back. Yeah.
The recording again. I close it. I pause it during the breakout.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
yeah.
Save some editing.
Yeah.
All right, the rooms are set to close in 43 seconds. All right, we're all back.
Good to see you all. Yossi, you want to say a little bit about how we can hopefully gather some feedback now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jed. Thank you for everyone for participating in the experiential and the breakout. So we're coming back into large group share and comment. So if any of you inclined and have something you're comfortable and you want to share and engage with Jed in front of everyone with mic and camera, please raise your hand there. If you'd rather just do it on mic, you can also do that. Or if you prefer, you could just type questions into the chat. But if people are comfortable, we'd love to see your face and hear your voice. Anybody want to share something from?
Hi.
Yeah.
It was an incredible experience. I feel so connected and so warm-hearted because everything I feel has been articulated in my little group, which was a fabulous, two fabulous women who are heroes in their journey. And thank you so much for this. I love you all. My heart is wide open.
Thank you. I'll take that all in.
I guess I have something.
Please.
Sorry. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Jed and Yossi, for putting this together, and for the people that are attending this in my breakout as well. I'm wondering how to go about healing wounds from a narcissistic father, and kind of what that journey would look like specifically.
Say more about what that means to you, narcissistic father.
Yeah, so my father was very narcissistic, like he was emotionally abusive, and then he would always flip it back around and gaslight all of us. So he would never take responsibility for his actions or apologize, and it always became like this is your fault and that sort of thing. So
Gotcha.
if that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of the healing process for me and for work that I've done with people over the years starts with just acknowledging the wound, recognizing that we had a father that had those kind of limitations. The second for me and for many people is that it has impacted, because many of us spend a lot of time denying the effect. So recognizing it impacted in some ways for me how I saw myself. It impacted how I saw relationships. And then the third part for me was not blaming myself for the problem, because in some ways I think when we're wounded as children, we tend to blame ourselves, even though consciously we might say, no, I get it's not my fault, but our bodies feel to blame or feel ashamed or feel there's something the matter with us. And the next level, fourth level for me, is being able to share with trusted others, to be able to just tell your story. This may be the beginning of that, to be able to say, yeah, that happened to me, because in the course of that happened in my men's group, I found I was not alone, that it happened to many of us, and sharing our stories was very healing. And then farther down the road, it takes a while where we can recognize that our fathers also had fathers or mothers or others that wounded them, and that they aren't to blame for what happened. They're responsible, and we felt the pain, but we can feel some of the compassion when we recognize their wounds. So that's a little bit. I know there's some other questions, and that's a quick answer to something that's a deep healing that hopefully this can be a continuing process for you, Ashley. So thanks.
Thank you.
This person,
Yes.
I see a couple of people raise their hands. So Michael, how do I
So those that raise their hands should either be able to come off open up their mic and the camera, and you can just
I
call
think
them.
Monica had their hand raised first.
Yeah.
Great,
Okay,
Monica, go ahead.
okay. I guess I'm surprised how much, before when I saw the title of this group, I didn't quite know if I had an issue, but I had an emotional reaction, like just before tears. And then when I got in the group just now and talked about it, it's surprising to me the emotions it brought up. My family, it's maybe not so much my father who grew up with it and was injured, but was also quite chivalrous towards the girls and mom. But there was an aura that he, especially, even though the boys and him didn't get along, there was still this really strong, clear feeling that as a girl, I wasn't up, I was less. Even though I wasn't really treated in a specific way, you know, I rode horses, I worked in the field with the machinery and that, but it was also facilitated by my mother saying things like, well, if he has to lift more when you're there, you know, you can't be making your dad work harder because you as a girl are helping him, even though I treated him with respect and got along well with him. But then when we grew up, no matter what, I was always burdened with this, you're not good enough trying to prove yourself thing. I became a large animal veterinarian. I ranched, but it was always like you weren't visible in the family. And even now with my dad gone and my mother there, the girls are not, it's like you're disappeared, I call it. And so I always have a cringing and a resistance to going home to visit. I have to make myself do it.
Yeah.
And so there's an emotion of resistance, but now there's also this emotion of pain.
Yeah. Well, freeing up the emotion often is the first step when your mind says, no, this didn't happen. And then something gets triggered, an emotional response, dropping into a group you didn't know maybe that why you did consciously, and somebody says something and all of a sudden some tears come or some emotional catch in our throats. And that then opens the door to having the pieces starting to make sense. Little parts of our lives get put together again. And it's as though the parts that somehow were disappeared, as you describe it, which is very common, or parts of us that felt like we weren't seen, and parts of us that didn't see ourselves. We felt sometimes invisible to ourselves, or pieces of us missing, start to reconnect and reconfigure. So you said it beautifully, and thank you for for allowing yourself to feel, to heal, and to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see a couple of people that
So
said.
Jenny has a question, and then also one in the Q&A. So Jenny, I don't know if you want to come off microphone and just, yep, there you are.
Okay. I just had two quick thoughts. I'll try to make it quick. It was, for me, I told my group that I had two fathers. I had one that left when I was 3 and I would see once or twice a year, and another was a stepfather who had more children. For me, that was a feeling of like not belonging to either. Now I'm realizing as an adult. But what I was going to say is my mother and a new relationship, I mean, kind of speaking to your point, Jed, about, the fact that the father, or, in my case, the father, the other partner had on my mother, and how that affected me. And my mother takes my stepfather's side over me in many instances. So that has become a wound that is, his behavior and her behavior that is kind of together. So that was just something I wanted to bring up too. And then the other thing is, for me with healing, I've come across, and I think this is probably for a lot of people, is that you want to involve the person that you feel has wounded you or is part of the wound, but a lot of times you cannot, due to the nature of their inability to do so, or they're not physically present, or that would just scar you more or wound you more. And that was really hard. That I find that interesting, to like not be able to involve, to have to do the work without the person who caused the wound. It makes it difficult too. So anyway.
Yeah, it's difficult, but not impossible. My father with his own wounding, disowned me numerous times throughout my life and his life. And I thought I would never have a reconciliation with him. And in my case, when he was in his 80s, we were able to break through. He had a breakthrough. But what I know is, as you say, Jean, that many of us don't have the person to be able to interact with. And what I've learned is you don't need the other person in order to heal. The healing can happen as you are heard by others, by your own inner father, because we all carry an inner, father in us, a healer in us that can hold us and heal us. So there's a lot of ways to heal, some of which can involve the person who may have been there or not there, and many ways that don't require them to be there. So thanks for sharing and continuing your journey.
Yeah, okay. I see C raised, you raised your hand, if I'm seeing correctly.
Yeah, Michael's got his hand up.
Oh, Michael, okay.
So Michael, do you want to come off microphone? And
Yes.
just ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for this conference. It's such a gift, and it's given me a lot of clarity on issues that I didn't even know I had, like this father issue. I've been aware that I suffered from an abandonment issue from my mother, but I've not realized until now that before my mother abandoned me, my father abandoned me. I was a bastard. I was sired out of wedlock while my father was away at the end of the Second World War. And there has never been a male figure in my life. In my formative years, there was never a male figure around. And I was very consciously concerned, anxious about wondering how a man was supposed to act. And I still at this point in my life don't have many male friends because I don't know. I guess I feel a little insecure. And I don't feel secure in presenting myself as big, and perhaps it amounts to feeling not man enough because I don't really know what man means in some sense.
Yeah. I hear you, brother. And what I can say is that's part of the wound to ourself, our own sense of self, and it manifests in all the ways you described. For me, it was an opportunity at some point where I said, I'm going to reach out anyway, even though I don't feel man enough to reach out, or I'm going to be rejected, to find someone. In my case, there was a group that started, but I've had just reaching out to one other person and saying, I want to share my story, and starting with vulnerability, which you just did, being able to say, I don't feel able, I don't feel like a man, just saying that. And I'm sure there's many people that are watching and being with you going, me too, brother, and women too, have that same feeling. And just sharing it, I can tell just by looking at you energetically, you feel a little bit more you because you're sharing the feeling of not being you. if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have time for one more, I think. Perhaps Ocean, I see you raised your hand if you want to unmute and.
Sure, thanks. I guess along a little bit the same lines, the most challenging piece that I've noticed around this is the way that, for me, the experience of a healthy father is not there. So it's, how would I know what I am missing? And it's taken me 50 years to really begin to see the outline of the space wherein I might have gotten a more confident sense of self. But it's so invisible, like the way the father wound doesn't see us, the father wound itself isn't visible. And so how do we begin to make that visible? How do I start to see what I'm missing? That's the big question that I'm really, the result that I'm hoping for is more resilience in the face of other people being just who they are. Right. So those two pieces are what's really alive for me. Thanks.
Well, what I would say is, there's a quote, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's about hanging out with the questions, not knowing the answer, but just the fact that you can articulate the question of how do you know what you're missing if you never had any reference point to know. And I'd say a couple of things from my experience is that you learn about what was missing and what is still there in relationship. And so being trusting of somewhere in your relationships that you will have in the question of how can I know is an answer that will start to be a little, I can tell it's even taking root a little bit now, that it starts to be a little tickle at first, and then it gets a little bit more and a little bit more. And one thing that helped me is recognizing that although we may have not had the father that we wanted or had a father at all presence, that there are father presences in our whole lineage. Your father had a father and his father, and they go back, and in that lineage and in your body memory, in your cellular memory, there are father energies, just like we have mother energies and feminine energies that will let you know they're there and will guide you in finding the parts that are missing to you that they know, and those cells in you know, that will start to light up here and there as you continue on in your journey. So thanks, Ocean. That's great. Appreciate it. What a good last sharing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jed, so much for shining some light on this hugely important topic that so many of us suffer, and thank you all for your vulnerability, for showing up and sharing with each other and with the larger group. So any final words from you, Jed?
Yeah, let me just say one final thing. Most of you know I have a website, menalive.com, and on that site there are a number of resources, and there's one particular one under courses that's a self-guided course that developed from my own healing over 70 years. And I developed a course that I wanted for people that didn't have 70 years to go through it like I did, to have kind of some shorthand guidances. So if people want to go deeper with those kinds of questions, there is some guidance available that you might check out on Men Alive.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I think you also generously contributed a free copy of your whole ebook with this title as part of the bonus package for the people. Yeah. So anybody can, if you access the recordings or you buy the upgrade package, you get bonus from Jed and everybody else, and it's Jed's full book on this topic, healing the family father wound. So that might be a good place for you to carry this work, and then this course and whatever else, and support groups and therapy. And so thank you all, traveling this journey, this sacred journey of healing and being human on this earth.
Thank you all for being with me. This is part of the great gift, is putting all this energy into the preparation, and then it's like first day of school to see who actually shows up in your class. And thank you for showing up in this particular part of my world. So bless you all, and thank you for being here.